the right time up for freedom? Could it be when you start to feel creating children who'll inherit the pain and the debt of this nation and be slaves to the banks that cause hyperinflation, who are masters of commerce, lies, and bad legislation? Whoa, if you looked in the eyes of 1,000 young children through fences of razors, their innocence stolen as the red flag of tyranny flies in the open, is that when you finally notice? Whoa, whoa, but I'm only a stranger here. I'm a long, long way from my home, and they say I can't change all the things I find strange, for what can one man do alone?
Welcome back to the Liberty Test, the show where we take government policy at its word and then put it to the test. I'm your host, Dan Castello, and I'm joined by Bob Schuon and Rose Leatherman. So tonight's topic is social media transparency, or more specifically, New York's Stop Hiding Hate Act. As of October 1st, this new law requires social media companies with over $100 million in annual revenue to submit biannual reports to the Attorney General's office detailing how they moderate content, specifically hate speech, racism, misinformation, and other content deemed harmful. They have to publish their terms of service in what the law calls accessible language, plain English basically, so users can understand the rules. And finally, they must describe how users can report policy violations and what actions the platform takes when those violations occur. The penalties for noncompliance, well, up to $15,000 per violation per day. So if you're a major platform and you miss a filing deadline or your report doesn't meet the state's standards, that fine could add up fast. Now, to be clear, the law doesn't tell platforms what to moderate or how to moderate. It doesn't mandate specific definitions of hate speech or misinformation, at least not explicitly. It just says, tell us what you're doing and tell the public what you're doing in a way they can understand. So what's the government's case? What's the justification? Well, according to Governor Kathy Hochul, this is about transparency and accountability. Social media, she argues, has become the modern public square, and when harmful content spreads unchecked, it can fuel real-world violence. She's used Asian hate as a specific example, and her work with the Anti-Defamation League also suggests that she would consider anti-Semitism an example of this sort of real-world violence. So regardless, the platforms profit from engagement, and sadly nothing seems to drive engagement quite like amplifying the most inflammatory, divisive, and dangerous content. So the state's position on this is straightforward. They're not telling platforms what to allow or what to ban, but they are saying to big companies, you need to be transparent about your rules and how you enforce them. Users deserve to know what they're signing up for. Communities deserve to know whether platforms are taking hate speech seriously. And if a company claims to have robust policies against misinformation, but doesn't actually enforce them, well, shouldn't the public know that? So from the government's perspective, this isn't censorship. It's not a First Amendment free speech thing. It's consumer protection. It's accountability. If you're running a platform where millions of New Yorkers spend hours every day, the state has a legitimate interest in making sure you're not hiding behind vague policies while harmful content runs rampant for profit. So again, this law is not banning speech. The government is not fining platforms for user posts. They're just requiring disclosure. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? And let's be honest, there is a problem. Real people have been harassed, threatened, and radicalized through social media. Communities have been terrorized by hate that started online, right? So when the Attorney General says this law is about keeping New Yorkers safe, when the governor says social media should be a place to connect, not a place to hide behind a keyboard and spread hate, well, on the surface, that sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Of course, this is the Liberty Test, and our job isn't just to nod along when the state says it's keeping us safe. So we want to ask whether this policy respects individual rights, whether it's actually a real problem, whether it even solves that problem, and of course, whether the power that the law grants today is a camel's nose under the tent. How might it be abused tomorrow? Because if requiring platforms to report their moderation policies to the government sounds harmless, well, who decides what counts as hate speech? Who defines misinformation? And when the state has a direct pipeline into how platforms police speech, does transparency become a Trojan horse for control? So let's bring in the panel and find out who wants to kick us off. Do we buy the state's line that this is just about accountability, or is
Well,
there something else going on here?
I have a question.
Hmm.
What if somebody from, say, California or Colorado is posting things that are being shown in New York?
Then they
That's
have to report it.
Things that are anti-New York or
No, no, no. If they have a presence in New York, if any New Yorker is accessing their platform,
Mhm.
then if that platform makes the amount of money they specified, I think $100 million, then they have to submit biannual reports.
yeah.
So what's likely to happen is that this is going to become like know your customer laws, where companies
Mhm.
who decide they don't want to cooperate with New York's laws are just going to become unavailable in New York State. Same as how various financial transaction platforms have decided they're not going to deal with New York State because of laws that were imposed that they did not want to comply with. They're like, it's easier to just not have our service be available in New York State.
But isn't that an example of the government acting bravely ahead of the pack to protect media consumers?
Isn't that an example of the government creating a chilling effect to actually suppress speech?
Right. I mean, let's look at the reason why social media platforms had hate speech policies in the first place. I remember the discussion over online hate speech starting way back during a situation in Myanmar where people were getting online on Facebook and they were getting each other riled up. They were talking about how much they hated a particular group of people, and it was leading to people actually going out and committing murder. And that was where Facebook started to really change their policies to crack down on hate speech. And it was understandable at the time. Like if you're running a social media platform and you realize, oh my God, people are getting each other worked up and it's having real world consequences, like we're going to want to do something to fix this. But that's the thing. Like
Yeah, but see, it's
they,
not. It's not the social media platform doing it. There's the biggest difference.
in
If Facebook
theory, yeah.
decides, or Twitter, or whatever, X, whatever, decides that it wants to moderate hate speech because it doesn't want things to happen that are related to its platform or caused the platform or people to be harmed, that's great. That's up to them. But when it's an outside influence, especially a government influence, now you've got a case of, okay, what if Colorado or Texas or anywhere else creates a law that doesn't match up with the one in New York? What do you do
Right. And
then?
it started out not as laws, but it was the fact that social media companies were able to get government subsidies, but they had to adhere to certain standards, and some of those standards involved removing certain types of offensive content, or they were not going to be able to get government funding.
This
So
is
it wasn't like it wasn't punitive at first. It was just, well,
well, it's
if you
always
want to keep
punitive
this
though. It's
if you want to keep this gravy train going, you just have to do these very simple things. I mean, in sounds reasonable. You don't want Nazis on your platform. No one wants Nazis on your platform. Okay, just implement policies that will get them kicked off. This isn't going to affect anyone else who wants to use the platform.
yeah.
Problem is the definition of what is considered hate speech changes depending on who's in office at that very moment and what the current political climate is. We saw this during COVID, where any skepticism of certain COVID mitigation measures, such as lockdowns or the COVID vaccine, was considered dangerous misinformation that the public should not be allowed to see. And you had government officials recommending to social media platform companies that they needed to remove these things.
Well,
This
yeah,
seems
government opinions on certain things, and that's
this
the
seems
thing.
this seems like a far cry though from what you guys are talking about. This actually seems like a much more simple milquetoast, inoffensive government action. I mean, here, if I read to you the requirements here, the reports that these companies have to file, only need to include the social media platform's current terms of service, whatever they are, list the changes to the terms of service since the previous report, and then they need to list whether the terms of service define hate speech, extremism, disinformation, misinformation, harassment, foreign political interference, that sort of thing. And then they need to describe their practices for moderating content, such as how the platform's policies address the content categories and how automated systems are used to moderate content and when
I'm
these systems
confused.
involve
Does New
human
York
review.
own a piece of Twitter or X,
Well,
or
if
does
a
it own a
company
piece
is
of
doing
Facebook?
business, if it's doing business, if it has economic
What's
nexus,
define business? It's a social media platform,
any user subscribe to their service in New York.
but this is again, this is the government jumping into private business, imposing its will. Okay, economically, that is literally the definition of fascism. It's literally the definition, because what happens is, if the platform, first of all, they're national platforms, that becomes a problem right off the bat. Because again, like I was mentioning before, let's say New York says, well, this has to be what you do for us. Now another state says, well, this has to be what you do for us, and the two don't match up. You have a
can
problem
have New
right
York
there.
say
Okay.
anti-Democrat rhetoric is hate speech, and
Yeah.
Texas saying anti-Republican
But I'm saying
rhetoric is hate speech.
But again, you guys are talking about the
Right, but
government
that's the thing.
defining these
Right
terms.
now,
I
it's
could
just
create a white supremacist social media network,
they
and I'm
just have
sure it
to
would make over
disclose that
100
you're
million a
on
year.
there. Yeah, you're not
Yeah.
banned yet. So
All I
the
have to
question
do is publish all
No,
our
but it
policies.
starts a process where whether it's claimed by the politicians or not, it's de facto control over a social media company that's basically worldwide. And how does that become? How does that be under New York's purview? In the court system, they don't have any standing to do that. Okay.
Okay, well, let's. Oh,
You
go
see,
ahead.
that's the old argument. Doing business in New York. Okay, how do you even figure that out?
Oh,
Are you
that's an
going to
easy
track
question. They do
everybody's
that
IP
for
address?
taxes. Well, yeah,
No,
they
no,
do.
no.
Yeah.
Well,
If
but
you make money, if someone makes a purchase using a credit card from a New York address, then you have economic nexus and you have to pay sales tax.
but
So
Anyone who,
people aren't
you
doing
know,
that on social media. Okay,
if
they
you're
just sign
paying
up.
for a service, I mean, yeah, the problem is though you're the product. You're not usually. It's changing. A lot of people pay for verification now, but in general, yeah, you're the product. You're not. It's a free service, and that's why you have very little recourse if you get banned, even though you haven't
Yeah,
broken
but
any
I
rules or
don't
anything.
report my
But
address to any of these social media companies. I don't
yeah,
report any information that I don't deem that they need to know, which is pretty
well,
much all of it.
do
Okay.
you send money to any of these companies ever? Do you make
Nope.
any transactions?
Nope.
Okay. Well, then in
I
that
think
case,
See,
you're
that
not going to be the
but
type of person
that's not the
who
point. I'm still being brought under this umbrella, like it or not. Yes,
you're not,
because
only the company is.
no. And then the company's going to say,
well,
well, to be able to comply in New York, we're going to have to
Mhm.
get your name and your address and your phone number to
Yes,
be
that's the
able to
thing I'm saying.
that's where
comply
this is
with
trending.
the
How are they
demands
going
of
to
New York.
enforce it?
I
We
think
need to
you've
make
just
sure
figured
that
out the real purpose.
we need to make sure that our New York consumers are protected. So therefore, we need to know if anyone in New York is using your service in order for you to operate in our state. Therefore, we're going to need identity verification for all of our customers. And we have seen, yeah, I mean, that right there is probably what this is a foot in the door to, among a couple other
And
things.
what's next?
We're seeing this.
Do you own any guns? Do you do you have
We're
any
seeing
other?
this all over the place. in several different countries all simultaneously. Like you're seeing this in other states where they just, oh, well, if you want to access adult content, we just need to see your ID to make sure that you're not a minor. You don't, okay, what are you, some kind of groomer? You don't want minors seeing adult content, do you? Yeah, this is just another means of having people verify their identity in order to use the internet. In this case, it's, oh, well, we need to verify your location to make sure that you are getting the company's up-to-date hate speech policies so that you, consumer, can make an informed decision, right? Because they care so deeply about the consumers, right?
Yeah. Come on, it's the same thing. It's for the children argument. It's like, no, that's not what it's for. It's for the fact that once they have this information, then they will go back to these companies and be like, well, now we need to know what groups everybody is in because we need to make sure that they're not a hate speech group.
And once they pass hate speech laws, then they've got each social media company's policy, and they can say, oh, well, this and this runs afoul of this new law, so you're going to have to change it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to operate in this state, or you'll be subjected to fines.
And how do they even do that? Like, how do these companies? Because here's the problem: is that people that are online can use multiple technological devices to obscure or even change their locations. Okay, I guess the Attorney General has never heard of a VPN where you could say, hey,
oh, they know.
I'm in Germany, I'm not here. I'm actually from Europe and I'm doing this, that, and the other. It's again, this whole thing is trying to use a state. Like if the federal government tried it, I don't think I'd agree with it, but they would at least have a better claim to doing this because it's nationwide and the company is a U.S. company and you can make all these other arguments. At least the arguments could be made. With New York, none of these companies are based in New York. Okay? They simply put stuff out on the internet, which is literally worldwide. Well, how can they make the argument that they're responsible for monitoring the internet? Like it's ridiculous.
Well, they need to make sure that none of their New York consumers are accessing a social media company that has not been transparent with their hate speech moderation policies. Even if those customers are using a VPN, clearly they're just too stupid to understand that if they're using a VPN, it means that they're not getting proper disclosure and they're not.
So okay, wait. So
if they're using a VPN, it must just be because they're too stupid to realize that they shouldn't be using a VPN because they want to get the New York version of Facebook that has its privacy policy disclosed in big bold letters on the front page.
So they're going to do
they're
this.
missing out on that if they're using a VPN. They can't. People can't be allowed to use VPNs anymore because clearly they're too stupid to use them responsibly.
So CBS and ABC and CNN, right, and NBC, they should all be doing the same thing then, right? Because they should be reporting all of their moderation policies to the state of New York. Because again, New York State has a right to protect its constituents. And guess what? Like CBS, and NBC, they are New York corporations, and they are operating.
Aren't they regulated separately?
Different.
Well, see, they're regulated under the
They're heavily
FCC,
regulated.
under the FCC, under the national organization. Now, again, that's a whole nother argument whether that's right or wrong. But
let's back up a little bit here because I think we glossed over one of the first things we try to do with the Liberty Test, which is to figure out if there even is a problem here that society would have to address, whether it's done by government or whether it's done by free people voluntarily. We're so upset about government control, but let's ask ourselves, is there a problem with hate speech and misinformation and racism and people radicalizing each other on the internet?
Well, before you start saying that, how about you start off with free speech? People are going to say stupid stuff on the internet. People say stupid stuff all the time, whether it's right, wrong, indifferent, not nice, argumentative, even speech that we would disagree with, like demanding violent action against other people. And we would definitely disagree with that wholeheartedly. However, okay, they do have the right to say it. Now, if the private platform decides that that's not what it wants to be, then it has the ability to do what it wants to curb that. However, it is quite a different story when an outside governmental entity attempts to step in and do this. We're seeing this now across the internet, okay, and other things. Did you know that companies across the United States now are getting taxation letters from the governments of pretty much all 50 states?
Yeah, every state they operate in.
Because
Right,
because
so
they're saying, well, wait a second, you are selling stuff in our state. You have to file all of these forms in 50 states, 50 separate forms.
Yeah, I
Now,
remember when there was no tax on Amazon stuff. You
well,
could
this
order
is
things
because
sales tax
again,
free.
same
Yeah.
with eBay, and then
and
they
now they're
started
creating all the
levying
reporting and
taxes
all the
on
stuff.
sellers.
And guess
Mhm.
what? All you're creating is overhead. You're creating overhead for all of these companies, and they're forced to comply because now it's tax revenue, and that's really important. So now you end up in a position where all these companies have to add entire departments just to handle all of this compliance.
Don't you think that stuff will go away though with AI? I would rather
No,
not make an argument from a practicality
no.
perspective. I would
Well,
make an argument from a rights perspective.
I want to go back to the consumer protection aspect because
Mhm.
we kind of touched on that at the beginning. It's not the state currently is not mandating anything. It's just consumer protection. They want
Transparency.
they want transparency. Okay, so suppose I sign up for a platform and they say, okay, this, and this are our policies, and then they claim that they don't allow certain types of content. Then I'm using the platform and I see that type of content. Like, if I have paid anything, suppose for a moment, just to make this more simple, that I paid $5 a month for access to their platform, technically they violated their contractual agreement, and I would have the right to sue. In real life, that usually it takes the form of a class action lawsuit because most people can't afford to do this on their own. But like, if you pay them money and they are not enforcing their policies, you technically do have a claim, which raises the question of why the state would need to get involved in the first place. Now, because like I
They run the
said,
courts.
most
Your suit
people,
would go through the courts run by the state.
which
In
also
fact,
means
that's what
run
this
by
law
crony
creates.
corporations, which most of these companies are.
Well,
So
if we
yeah,
take them
that
at
raises,
their
yeah,
word, though, you go to their website, ag.ny.gov, and there's a little button, where you
right.
submit a
So
report.
to steelman their argument, like, why not just eliminate the need for that? Just mandate that they have their policies nice and transparent on the front page so that people don't get tricked.
That's what they're
So,
mandating. That's what this is.
so the question is, is there enough market demand for transparency and social media policies that the state doesn't need to get involved? I think we are seeing it. Like, fewer and fewer people are using platforms like Facebook because they got sick of, one, the inconsistent moderation policies, the AI slop, the constant rage bait. So in some ways, yes, there is an appetite for better platforms. And I think a lot of people are finally waking up to the fact that, oh, you know what, this is a waste of time. It's just going to feed me constant rage bait.
I think the dynamic right now is that most people who have an ideological viewpoint or a cultural perspective, they get angry with, the predominant viewpoint that's pushed by the platform that they're using. So then they leave with other people who feel the way they do, and they join a different platform which uses more or less the same moderation policies, but
And the
against
other,
the right.
yeah, it's
And
like
so
people
you
who left X for Blue Sky after Elon took
Mhm.
it over.
That's right. And I think that eventually what I would like to see happen is for people to learn how to create their own social media feeds, rather than require someone to do that work for them. So to curate the content yourself. Now, there's ways to do that. There's a protocol, sort of like how email is a protocol or how The internet is a protocol. There's a protocol called Noster, stands for Notes and Other Stuff Transmitted by Relays. And Noster, being a protocol, isn't a platform, so it's not owned by anyone, and it's open source, so anyone can work on it. You can download apps on your iPhone like Primal, or that works actually on Android too. Amethyst, I think, is just for iPhone, but there's many, many out there. And the way these work is you create an identity using a private key, so it's encrypted. It doesn't have to be tied to anything, like Bob was talking about before. The companies you interact with through Nostr or individuals you interact with, you would not have to disclose anything that you don't want to disclose. You just use an encrypted profile, and you could have a bunch of them if you want. So anyway, you can interact with other Nostr applications using whatever program or application you decide to use or create yourself. And then you can, if you use, say, like an X clone or a Twitter clone or a Facebook clone or a YouTube clone, you can control your feed by figuring out which relays you subscribe to. And these are completely uncensorable because if the government shuts down one relay, another relay will simply open and move things along. And there's other aspects to this too that we don't have to get into. Economic aspects, people can pay each other using Bitcoin or the Lightning Network over Nostr. It's really interesting how this kind of freedom tech is taking root. And a lot of people joined Nostr during that time when a lot of people were fleeing X, not fleeing the second time from the red takeover, but fleeing the first time from the blue
When they
takeover.
were ban happy, yeah. Same
Mhm.
with when Facebook went on all their various purges every time there was every time the state was panicking about some new scary group. But okay, so I think we've established that um, the state probably doesn't need to be involved in forcing companies to be transparent about their moderation policies. People will either leave and go to a different platform, or they'll just decide not to use this particular platform, or they're not going to care. So again, we can go back to, okay, so what's the real intention behind this law most likely? And even if it's being passed in completely in good faith, suppose for a second that we have benevolent
The
politicians
fantastically
who actually do
pretend.
just want consumer protections. What are the potential consequences if somebody who doesn't share their vision gets into the government who does have bad intentions?
Again, Lisa, my biggest issue with this is the fact that national or worldwide companies, if if you start regulating them based on the states, on individual states, compliance becomes almost impossible. Like how do you comply with 50 different sets of rules in 50 different states that that are imposed upon you, okay? Because again, what if New York decides tomorrow that, well, not only do you have to report it, but you have to tell us about every single group you have, what
Mm-hmm.
they're doing, I mean, once the state can claim its territory, then you basically have a situation where they do control you. It's
Right.
again,
It'll.
I
Oh,
it always reminds me of like The Godfather. It's like, see, I'm doing all these things for you, but what are you gonna do for me? And it's like, no, like that's again, and underneath it all is always the threat. Even if it seems benign, there is always the threat behind the demand. And it's like,
right. I
do
mean, we
this
saw
or
this.
else.
Yeah, we
And look
saw
at
this.
the fines that they imposed, okay? On an individual, they would probably be considered excessive. $15,000 per incident per day. Anybody want to do the math on that one? Okay? Because at $1,000 a day, that's $365,000 a year times 15. So that's what? 1.5 million, a little more than that. Yeah, something like that. Okay? More, no, a
Well,
lot
not
more than that.
nothing.
Okay, yeah, it's not. But that's per incident. So again, the threat is already there. We're just going to take your revenue if you don't do what we tell you to do. Tell me how that's not a threat.
We saw this during the COVID era where we had those hearings where the heads of social media were brought before Congress and lectured about how, oh, we used to have this issue with robber barons, and that's why we passed all these laws allowing ourselves to regulate companies. Wouldn't it be a shame if we had to regulate you guys? Now, what are you going to do about these all this problematic content that we're seeing on your platforms? Yeah, it's that. Like, what's going to happen is, okay, this law will be passed. It'll be given some time to simmer, maybe a year or so. Then there will be additional policies. Maybe at first it'll just start out as recommendations. Something will happen where, I mean, something similar that we've already seen. There will be some high profile murders or something, and companies, or rather government officials, will be like, social media platforms are like they are what's spreading rhetoric that's causing these crimes to be committed. So we see these like this, and this is a weakness in your hate speech moderation policies. We recommend that you make these particular changes. Okay, give that 6 months to simmer, then there will be something passed. There'll be some new law against domestic extremism, and then it'll go from recommendations to social media companies actually having to, by law, suppress certain types of content and remove certain types of users if they say the wrong thing or promote the wrong ideas.
Yeah, the wrong ideas according to the state.
Which depends on who is in office at that particular time.
According to the actual definition of that term, begging the question, let's backtrack here. Can the government compel reporting without influencing content moderation decisions?
No, it's not possible. And again, it's how is that different than the mafia? Because do this, or there might be an accident.
So a transparency requirement equals content control?
Yes.
Transparency is control? I firmly
believe that. Well, no. Control is control. Because if I control how you report, when you report, what you post for your content policies, then I control you. If you're only allowed to do something, you have to send me a report every day stating what you're going to do today and how you're going to do it and who you're allowed to do it with.
Let's unpack this a little
There's
further.
Going to be
What's
pressure
the mechanism
to conform to certain expectations based on who is in office and what the current political climate is.
Where does the pressure come from?
Just the fact that you're required to do it.
Who has the ability to send armed agents of the state after you, and
Let's unpack this even further. I want to be granular here for people who aren't going to get this. Let me explain what I'm getting at here. The law as it's written creates an opportunity for normal everyday people, users of these social media platforms, to very, very easily find things they don't like about the moderation policies of the platform. So any social justice warrior or any political activist who wants to find something can. Then they're going to report it through this very easy web portal that they've created, and the government can then choose which of these policies they want to actually pursue, to enforce. That's the mechanism. So, for example, we could be very upset that, I don't know, a bunch of inappropriate material is being sent to small children about gender identity, and we might, flag that. But if it's a Democrat in office, they're not going to care. But if we say something, that they don't like, about, I don't know, for
people
example,
saying they want 10 rounds in a magazine.
Sure, could be anything. They're going to decide.
Meanwhile, legislators in Texas might take issue with the gender identity content, so they'll have a completely different set of expectations. So
but they're not going to be able to have different moderation
effect on speech.
Right, that's the key. They're not going to have different moderation policies for Texas and New York.
Right, they'll just start suppressing anything that might be controversial at all.
At any state's demand.
You'll be
So
able
again,
to talk about sports and TV shows, and
so it's going
that's
to be
about
a
it. No
race,
politics.
but it's going to be a race to be the most restricted moderation, because they have to satisfy everyone. That's impossible, because you can't. Because again, like you said, Hawaii, it'd probably be one of the worst states. Because what do you do when you've got a deep, deep blue state? Well, we don't feel that this is appropriate content. Talking about guns is absolutely not allowed in our state, because it's extremist and it's violence. And now what is the company going to do? They're going to create a policy just for Hawaii? Or are they just going to say, well, forget it, we're not going to talk about that at all? You see, this is that rabbit hole you start to go down, and it sucks everybody in. And New York knows, Kathy Hochul knows exactly what she is doing and why she's doing it. Okay? And they want to do this. They want to suppress the speech, because they know the only way that they can get across and get their way is to suppress the speech of, especially starting with New Yorkers, of course, but everyone.
Right.
Well,
And
you just
Used
hit the
to
nail
be,
on
yeah. It used to be people could win office on their merits. People are becoming more and more cynical towards their elected officials. So for a long time, they've just run on, oh, well, okay, we're bad, but the other party is worse. People are waking up to that too, it feels like. So now we just need to restrict what information people have access to. It used to be that people had to get their information from the news. And when was the last time the US had an actual genuinely free press? We've had involvement of various three-letter agencies in the press for a very long time. You have high-level reporters getting invited to dinners at the White House. Obviously, that's not going to happen if they're actually these rebellious truth tellers.
Let's take, for example, the current campaign for New York City mayor. Okay, so you have three wildly different candidates. Well, not wildly different, but two of them are similar. But one of them has actually made statements in the past completely promoting socialism and socialist policies and things like restrictions on free speech and restrictions on other issues. But they're now walking those back. Well, it's very inconvenient when people on social media platforms go back and pull up all of those incidents and say, well, no, you actually said this, and this. And wouldn't it be really convenient if you could suppress those people and say that's hate speech, that's inappropriate, and that's not a factual. That's you know what I mean?
People have access to actual on-the-ground footage of things or of events that are happening around the world. Like, for example, suppose there's a country that's in the midst of committing a genocide, but all of the captured media platforms are saying, oh, no, that country is just defending its right to exist. And then you can go online and look at what's actually going on.
Well, why do you
That's
think
the
they
problem.
turn off?
That's the problem to
they
the
turn
people
off access
who
to social
are
media, because that's
trying to
how do
push
you
a
suppress?
particular narrative. Okay, they're going to take issue with, oh, we can't have this is the Wild West. That's bad. We can't have people just going online and accessing whatever information they want.
Accessing the truth. Yeah, that's a real problem for politicians.
That's the thing. These carefully curated narratives completely fall apart when people can just go online and access information from wherever and whoever they want.
Well, this is
the state has wanted control of. They want to control the flow of information. They have wanted control of the internet for as long
years.
As the internet became for as long as regular people have had access to the internet.
The internet has been a politician's nightmare, because you can't hide what you're doing anymore. It's impossible, because everybody sees everything. Everybody keeps records of everything. And when you say one thing and then turn around and say something else, you will instantly get 50 people popping up saying, no, here's what you actually said. And they hate that, because politicians lie. They all lie. They lie to get what they want. They lie to get into office, and they want to suppress anything that might make them look bad. And
Well,
this is again,
they're beholden to corporate masters and banking cartels, and they have to protect their interests too. They have to push
Right, and
This
those
is-
interests change depending on who is currently funding them as what and what is the most politically expedient way for those corporations to get what they need and to
guaranteed.
On
Once
both
this
keep their
law,
profits up.
once this law is fully in effect, what will happen is you will see a blizzard of, people say this about this candidate. Oh, no, that's hate speech. That's not true. This platform should be moderating that. Should be. Okay. And then, but another side will say something the opposite. Oh, well, that's fine. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody's complaining.
Bob,
The worst part.
ask you, hold on a second. Here's something that you just made me think that I think as libertarians we have to address head on. Are we saying that companies are not required to be transparent about their moderation policies or their lack of moderation policies? So, like, even in Ancapistan, companies shouldn't have to publish that information?
Right. I mean, I sort of brought that up earlier. Like, consumers in theory they'd look at when deciding which social media platform they want to give their information to and they want to be active on. They would look at the policies, decide whether or not it's for them, and if it's a paid platform, like they would read over the rules, give their money to this platform, and if the platform violated the contractual agreement that was made when you decided to pay for it, you should have recourse in the form of being able to demand a refund and take them to court if they don't give you your money back and they violated their own policies.
So what you're saying is that the actual violation that would be punished here is when a company fails to live up to its own standards, and they're free to decide what those standards are, obviously influenced by the market.
Right. And if it's important
different?
to me that I know what the standards are, like I'm not going to use a platform that is too secretive about what their standards are.
But how is that different from this act that New York
because
is
that's
passing?
being imposed from outside for a completely different reason. Okay.
If there's market demand for it, companies will start doing it because they want to retain their consumers.
So it's totally okay if markets decide?
Yes. Why? That's the only way things get decided. If people want something, they go there and they get it. They create, the market is automatically created. It creates itself because people have things that they want, and if they want to be able to interact with other people, good, bad, or indifferent, there will be companies that spring up to supply that need. However, when it's inconvenient to people in power, i.e. politicians, they don't like that they want to suppress this because they want to get all the good press and none of the bad. And this is perfect example is COVID. COVID really opened people's eyes up to all of this because, first the story was 2 weeks. Remember, everybody gets 2 weeks.
I remember telling people, I'm like, it's not 2 weeks, right? Nobody believed me.
Well, they did after 2 years, because again, this is what happened is people, because again, you can only suppress so
now
much.
they're all saying that they were against it all along.
Yeah.
I remember, I have very distinct memories of arguing.
Just ask them, did you wear the mask and get the shot? That's all you need to know.
COVID is a really good example. I'm glad you brought it up because it proves that when the government cannot impose complete totalitarian control over media, the truth does eventually come out. It's messy. There are lots of wrong things that come out. People do all kinds of hysterical things. But eventually, when ideas fight other ideas, the good ideas can rise to the top as long as there's something to measure them against in the real world.
Right. I was going to say, so at best, suppose for a moment that this is not going to escalate. It's not just a foot in the door like we all know it is. Suppose it just ends at companies having to be transparent. Like at best, if there was not actual widespread consumer desire for this, like people are just going to click through. They're going to click OK without reading. They're not going to care. about the page that pops up when they're in the middle of the sign up process saying, and this is what our hate speech policy is. Like, at best, that will be the outcome. But I think we all know that it's not going to end there. Yes.
Because again, what happens is they'll click through and they'll ignore it until all of a sudden, hey, why did my post get blocked? Why did I get banned? Why? All of a sudden, then that kicks in, like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Now, it's one thing if that's the company doing it because they directly own that decision, okay? And what happens is if that decision is not what their users want, their users will retaliate and go elsewhere and they'll lose business and market share. That's on the company. But when the government does it, what restricts them? What consequence is there of the government taking these actions? What stops the government from doing this? From going deeper and deeper and pushing the companies into more and more restrictive policies? How do we stop this? You know?
Well,
again, it's
things that they can't regulate. So VPNs, Tor network, or like Dan was saying, Nostr and other platforms that are difficult to censor. But I mean, we're seeing this already in the UK with the mandatory digital ID laws and some of their draconian hate speech laws. People just start using VPNs to get around them. Now they're already talking about banning VPNs for civilian use.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Oh, of course, it still means though. You could still it has enough of a chilling effect because nobody wants to risk becoming that person that they decide to make an example out of with a lengthy prison sentence and/or a super high fine because you were caught using a VPN. Yeah, people will slip under the radar, but
Canada played this game with, again, they tried to suppress everything they did to the truckers and, again, cut them off from social media, stole their money, literally stole their money, okay, to prevent them from creating even bigger protests and harming their own people to prevent dissent. Mm-hmm. So, and the problem is a lot of people kind of gloss over and they, Canada is so nice and they're great people, but they have a messed up government. And this is the same problem. Look at Great Britain. Great Britain right now is actually very, very scary what's happening in Great Britain. Remember, this is the country that kind of bore the United States originally. And one of the reasons we had that revolution was we don't want the government controlling us in particular ways. And especially when it comes to what we say, what we think, what we talk to our neighbor about. And the government should not have entry into this. The government should say, you got a policy? Great. That's your policy. Okay. Be transparent? Great. But the fact that a single state can impose these kinds of regulations and again, the federal government has more of a claim on this, but it's still not a great issue. It's something that if it needs to be done at all, then it needs to be done very lightly and it needs to be done with actual protection of things like children or violence.
You're saying it could be done through the courts without the political bias or agenda, and it could be done based specifically on the content of each contract and whether it was violated. And because you're allowing companies to come up with whatever terms of service they want, the market will eventually determine what most people want, and anybody who's on the fringe and wants something different should still be able to find what they want.
I would wager
that's why we're seeing migration away from platforms that are just full of AI slop and rage bait already. You have people saying, this isn't worth my time anymore. I'm going to go to this other platform where I can at least connect with cool people.
Well, I think the problem is that up until recently, like with Nostr, I think until recently, when you move from one platform to another, there's two problems. One is that you abandon everything that you have constructed. Right. So if you're an influencer, you've got some kind of business online, you
have a following and you're losing that.
And the second problem is that now you have no audience either. And because of the network effect, if you go to a new platform and there's nobody there, there's really no reason to be there. So only a few diehards will populate that new area, and unless a whole lot of other people show up, you're in trouble and you cannot create nearly the same success that you had
And
in the
that's why
old.
these are rolled out so slowly. It does feel deliberate. Like there'll be a mass. I mean, I got a couple years back, got caught up in one of Facebook's mass ban waves, and then got my account back later, a couple months later. But yeah, so you lose access to the network you built up. In some cases, that's like your only way of staying connected to certain people who you've met over the years. So even if you take your business to a different platform, those people have not yet gotten caught up in the next band wave, so they haven't migrated over. So you hang out on the new platform for a couple weeks, you eventually get discouraged because even if you say, hey, I'm over on this new platform, you guys should come and join me, like they don't have the motivation to do that just yet. So eventually you get discouraged and you lose interest. Then they get caught up in the band wave. They go over to the new platform. Nobody's there. Same thing repeats. So yeah, there needs to be a
Yeah, but it
mass
happens.
migration.
I mean,
And as of now, yeah, there hasn't been enough. I think it is slowly changing where there is slowly but surely becoming demand for platforms that don't censor people and that don't have these completely random
It's
algorithms that
happening
will
in the
ban you
opposite
for
too. Look
saying,
at Blue Sky. Blue Sky is deliberately populated by tons of people who want more content moderation. That's why
which,
they go there.
well, they want
well,
it
no,
in the
they
other
want it in
direction.
single direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but that's what they do. If you go on Blue Sky and you just sort of eavesdrop for a while, that's honestly all it is.
Is what?
People moderating each other. They're all competing to be the most woke. It's
And
ridiculous.
eventually it'll
Yeah.
just die of its own accord because it's,
Eh,
but
you would
I've got
think
a
so,
challenge.
but there are cults that have lasted hundreds of years based on nothing more than, I'm more moral and
Well,
upstanding than you are.
don't keep that on your hat, libertarian. Yeah. Uh, anyway, uh, I've got a challenge though. I got a challenge for you viewers out there. Go out, grab Facebook's terms of service, X's terms of service, Rumble's terms of service, any of them. Compare them. Want to bet that they're almost, I won't say identical because they probably have different sections in different places, but I would be willing to wager that those policies are very, very similar
Oh.
to each other.
And yet they differ in how they're enforced, which again, that's
Right.
another problem though. A lot of times like
But
these
that depends
content
on
moderation
company
policies
ownership.
are just vague enough that yeah, you could get caught up in getting banned for hate speech because it was vaguely
Oh, God.
defined.
New York is going
Oh,
to go after Elon.
Yes, of course they are. But you know who they're not going to go after? Blue Sky, right?
Zuckerberg.
And
Yeah,
Zuckerberg, right? Why
yeah.
not?
the
Because,
current government might go after Blue Sky though. We're seeing a lot of
well, this is
yeah.
again. So now you
Now
end up with
you
the
have far
government
right people complaining
jumping
about
into
hate speech
this
now too.
in any form is a bad idea, okay? Because again, the government has power and influence that a private company cannot match.
Yeah.
Okay, so they shouldn't be involved in this. Honestly, if there was a constitutional amendment I would absolutely support, it would be that government is not allowed to engage in, influence, or regulate outside of pure physical safety companies, businesses. Because this is half the problems we run into nowadays are
Uh,
because the government is trying to influence businesses and it's none of their business. It has nothing to do with them, and it's we talk about this from both sides because guess what? Putting money into Intel, why? Why are we doing this? Why are you using my tax money for this? Okay, and it's the same thing with the moderation. It look. Everybody can play the game of, oh, it's for the children, it's for safety, and we all know, and everybody knows in their heart of hearts, that's not what this is about. It's an excuse to help get control back of these social media companies because certain politicians want to be able to suppress data that they don't like and promote data that they do like. And
well, the
that's
thing is,
the basic idea.
for decades, people did seem to realize that this is not the first time the state has tried to regulate the internet. Every couple of years, generally, they'll come out with they'll trot out some idea just to test the waters. We need to do something about online piracy. Backlash against that was huge. We need to do something about child predators using the internet to protect the children. People saw through that. They do this year after year after, or every few years. They'll try again and again. Then they'll back off when they get enough backlash. I feel like we've actually reached a point, though, where political polarization is so bad that people do seem to become increasingly friendly to the idea of moderation as long as it affects the people they don't like. For example, people who were Charlie Kirk fans, they're now saying, oh, well, we can't have people going on the internet and getting each other worked up and becoming radicalized so that they want to kill political pundits that we like. No, we need hate speech regulations. Clearly, I am now sold on those.
Who said that?
See this also in the other
Heard
direction. I have. I definitely have seen. Yeah.
And didn't Pam Bondi suggest something about hate speech?
Yeah.
And you have it in the other
which
direction. You're like, you
pulled
can't.
back.
Okay, you can't have racist content being spread. It's causing hate crimes. You have to crack down on hate speech.
Let me ask you guys, as
You see this in both
libertarians in good
directions now.
standing, what is hate speech? Is that a term libertarians should even accept?
I don't know. What if I hate you?
You
It's
shouldn't
like-
be allowed to say that, because what if someone watches this stream
Oh,
and gets inspired
gets
to
their
murder
feelings
him?
hurt. It's like, again,
No. Someone might get inspired to go and murder him later.
Bob, bring up our platform and post that on the screen, because we actually have a line in our platform specifically about this issue.
Okay, let's see if I can get it up here.
Yeah, it would be platform plank 1.5.
Let me
There's
see.
a distinction between ideas and
1.5.
violence, right? Am I thinking of the right one?
Open expression.
Yeah, ideas, though they may challenge or offend, are distinct from acts of violence. Every individual is free to communicate, articulate, share, or otherwise assert their ideas and beliefs, and to expose themselves or refrain from exposing themselves to the freely expressed ideas of others. And that brings up another issue here. Isn't the government compelling speech with its mandatory reporting?
Yes. That's been the whole point, is that they're forcing these companies to report to a political entity.
Well, that's the thing. What if they didn't even have a hate speech policy? What if they're like, what if you have a platform where they're like, you know what? No restrictions whatsoever. This is a free speech platform. Yeah, are they now compelled to have a hate speech policy in the first place?
Not according to this act, at least as far as I can tell by reading it,
Okay.
which I did twice before this podcast to be sure. It seems like all you need to do is say, this is our policy. So if you
Okay.
wanted to have, Nazi white supremacist central Facebook and, everyone joining was like, yeah, we like white supremacy, then you would just write that in
And
your...
how long would that last?
Right.
In real life.
How long before the recommendations that you modify it so that you don't run afoul of certain laws that are being discussed start flying, and then how long before you're in direct violation of actual new laws that were passed?
There is a lot of
Like I said.
distasteful speech out there. There is some repugnant speech out there. There's a lot of stuff that, libertarians hate having to even think about because it really, pushes on our core principles. Things like art. If somebody draws something depicting something that people find disgusting or morally repugnant, if it happened to a real person, is that protected speech? And
Right. Is there a victim? Yeah,
no
because
victim,
sometimes
no
you're like,
crime, right?
you're like, I hate this, but is there a victim? But does it matter? Like, what if, because this might encourage someone to go and do something that will have a victim? Like,
I think those are the moral gray areas.
I think that's also been, again, more pushed by the politicians. Like that it's I don't want to say worse than it is, but it's being brought to the forefront when it's a few sad and deranged individuals who already have problems, who already have mental issues, and the fact that the it's used to ramp up the violence. You know what I mean? To how do
It's
I
the think of the children type thing. They use it as
yeah,
a reason to justify doing
right,
the controlling things they wanted to do anyway. But that
exactly.
doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't a problem there to begin with. There are things like, child sex trafficking and, explicit
Yeah.
exploitation of people. And, again, I used the example of art, where no real person is being harmed
Right, but
specific, because
I'll
that's
give
the
you an
gray
example of
area.
the public handling this in its own way. Okay, the whole thing. Go back to Charlie Kirk. Look at what happened to the people that outright said that that he was deserved it or anything like that, and the immediate, and I mean immediate, okay, backlash from other people saying, "How dare you?" Okay, and refuting everything that they're saying, and then that gets back to their companies and their employers saying, "Yeah, how come you're saying things like that? That doesn't fit our policy." Now, this is not government intervening. The government's not doing this at all.
Hmm.
This is the outrage coming across from other people who are saying that's disgusting to say things like that. And what
Hmm.
kind of a person are you to go out and say these things about another person who, by the way, did not do any of the things that you're accusing them of? And then that being picked up by their employers saying, we agree. This is beyond the pale, and you should not be saying this. We don't want people who say this in our businesses. So it's a reaction that is not not taken by government. Not It's taken by other people in the society. Because guess what? The government cannot regulate free speech. That doesn't mean that other people
Well,
can.
they're not supposed to be able to. That doesn't mean they're not going
Well,
to
yeah,
try.
no, you
Bring
know what
up
I'm saying.
platform planks 2.1 and 2.3,
Let me
because I
see
think
if
this
I can
is
get
what
it
we were
back.
thinking of when we created that.
1 second.
I mean, basically, it's the principle of voluntary association, right? Free exchange and voluntary agreements between platforms and users are how you regulate conduct, right? They're
Right.
social mores. Government, inserting itself into private contractual relationships is not only completely unnecessary, it actually perverts a process that would work better if it was allowed to.
Right.
So platforms allowed their autonomy, set their own community standards, and believe it or not, most people are decent. And I think you're arguing that we're going to eventually find that if people are allowed to voluntarily associate, the problem of, you know, child sexual abuse material and hate speech and racism and violence and stuff will not be anything near what the government makes it seem like.
Yep.
I mean, I've never seen so much unity and various social media groups I've joined as I have when someone gets outed as a sexual predator, and then you've got all these people like putting them on blast, saying, "Hey, if this guy is on your friends list, be sure to remove them and report them, and tell everyone what they." So yeah, I mean, people will hold each other accountable, and
Right. As they should. Again, people
social
that
ostracism has always been a powerful tool.
that's it.
I'm not. And that's the thing, is I've always had very mixed feelings about cancel culture. Like, in general, I think you're a shit person if you go after someone's livelihood because you don't like something they said on the internet, within reason. Like, I mean,
Yeah, but that's
I
where the
can
biggest
understand, like,
difference
if
came.
someone is like a doctor or
Because
something, or a nurse,
this
or
wasn't
like,
that
yeah.
I disagree with what Charlie is saying. This is saying that he was such an evil person that he deserved what happened to him, and that's completely untrue. And like I said, it kind of, as human beings, it kind of gets down to the core of what do you actually believe in, okay, about other people. And the fact that you might think that this other person deserved violence, it's I've said as much on other shows. it's beyond the pale. It's like, are you a human being or not? We respect the whole point of remember our original platform point. We are human beings because we can recognize the rights of others. Okay? And people that don't do that, people that break that compact, now you have to wonder about their humanity in general. Because again, if you're willing to commit violence or to advocate committing violence against another person because you disagree with their political position or even their positions on other subjects, that's like there's something wrong with you.
I agree with
Right.
you, Bob, but what if
Right.
you believe you're acting in self-defense against
Right.
a
Like, what if they're pushing, or what
ideology
if
that
they're
you believe is
gaining,
aggressive?
right? Like, what if they're advocating for a particular, like, set of political ideas that, I mean, as they say, politics is downstream, or politics is downstream from culture. Like, what if they're advocating for a culture that could lead to the implementation of policies that will directly harm you or people you care about? Like, there are people who will say,
But there's a
hey,
difference
if you're a
between speech and
propagandist for the
violence, and
state,
we
that
make that distinction. Okay, we make that
I
distinction even in our
agree, but
platform. Speech
I
is not
agree, but
violence. Yes, you may violently disagree with a particular piece of speech, but it's not violence. When you advocate for violence, that's a different matter. Because again, you're saying that this person is no longer a human being to me. They should be taken away from from their
what
life,
if,
from their, and
okay, but okay,
that's not acceptable.
when you advocate violence, like what if you are saying, I advocate reducing this class of people to being second class citizens? Like, again, I agree. Like, okay, no, you should never try to suppress someone's speech. You should never go after someone for speech. You should only ever, yeah, speech is very different from actions. However, the line is blurrier
Yeah,
than
but
people
see,
want to
that's
pretend
the point, is
sometimes.
that advocating for, and I'm not talking about, you know,
Right. There are,
we
like,
all
it's
get
blurry
very
enough
pumped
that
up with our
people can
ideas,
convince themselves that they're acting in self-defense.
right? But there's a difference between, like you said, actually advocating for violence and violent action. Okay, and the fact, this is where it's
Bob, bring up 3.1.
okay.
Defensive response. Individuals have the right to use reasonable and necessary force. So the point is, if someone is advocating violence, what is the reasonable and necessary response to that? It might be advocating something different. It might be
Right.
finding out, common ground or some sort of negotiated settlement. And yes, it might mean something more kinetic, but the point is that there's a whole range, there's a spectrum of
Right. If
responses.
some pundit is saying, I'm advocating laws that such and such people shouldn't have basic human rights, those people might say, well, we're going to start networking and we're going to arm ourselves so that we can defend ourselves if necessary. Like, that would be a proportional response. And then, yeah, if someone actually does try to do something violent against them, they'd be justified in self-defense. Yes.
Now, people are allowed to delegate their defense
Of course,
to
yes, they
other
could
people.
hire, yes, they could
And
hire
so,
security guards.
so even in Ancapistan or Libertopia, there might be organizations with the ability to use force and the right to do so, and they might align with insurance companies and other organizations to essentially recreate something very much like what we have today, where the government says, hey, we're not going to tell you what to say, but we do demand that you be transparent so that we can hold you accountable when you violate your own terms of service. And if you advocate violence or do things that hurt people, we reserve the right to respond using reasonable and necessary force to protect the people who have delegated that right of self-defense to us.
Mhm.
Is there anything in there that you guys would disagree with?
Well, I mean, aside from the fact that it's government, it would be much better if it was private entities. And again, if you go on platforms even today, and go straight out and advocate for actual violence, okay, you will get shut down, okay, because these companies don't want that any more than anybody else does.
Right. They don't want the liability because
Well,
if,
but it's
if
not just
something
the
happens,
liability.
they don't want to risk the lawsuit. Even if you remove the state completely,
Right.
they still risk someone dragging them to court, dragging their name through the mud, saying, "Oh, my loved one was killed because some guy saw this stuff written on their platform and got radicalized by it." Yeah,
I think the bigger problem
most
is
platforms do not want straight up incitement or like violent speech.
I think it's more of a problem that we have delegated so much authority to the
It's
government.
easy.
Okay.
People don't want to hold each other accountable. People just want to be
exactly
able to run
right. And this is
situations people are taught to do this from early childhood. You're taught to go tell a teacher if something bad happens.
Right,
Hey, people run crying to an authority figure to solve their problems because it's the easiest thing you can.
Precisely.
It's easier than having to try to fix the problem yourself.
So then why are we trying to convince people to do something that is more challenging that they don't actually want to do?
Because they've been trained that way.
Because what if someone tattles on you and the teacher's authority gets turned against you?
To stand up and solve your own problems and work out your own issues, okay? I think people would be much healthier. I think a lot of this stems from the fact that government has taken so much of this process of learning to deal with other people, learning to deal with opinions that you don't agree with or don't like or despise, that the very mechanism in human beings that allows us to do that, to have a debate, to be able to disagree and still shake hands afterwards, is literally being edited out of people because you're being told anything you do is okay, because the government's in charge, they'll take care of it all. And
so you're saying that when people are forced to deal with problems themselves and interact in that process, civilization is a lot more polite.
It's a lot better off.
If you can go running to the government in secret and you can say, hey, solve this problem for me, you not only give the government the authority to decide whether or not they're going to, but you also let them cherry pick which cases they want to take on so that way they can impose their agenda. And because government has so much power, now suddenly it's worth fighting over. And now all of society breaks down as everybody fights for the only gun on the table.
And it affects...
People don't want the other teams...
but it affects
they don't want the other team to have their politicians in office who can enforce these policies against you. So, yeah, they start viewing the other team as an existential threat.
I think it's
and we're not saying that you can't delegate.
Over the past. This issue has really escalated over the past decade. People have started viewing each other as existential threats because if you support the other team, well, they're going to take my rights away. So therefore, you're bad if you're supporting those people. They don't. Yeah. They don't make the connection that they should just be angry at the people who actually have the monopoly on force. They just blame the people who support them, who think that they are acting in self-defense, but that's kind of a whole other can of worms there.
Well, it's a very good point you raise, and I want to emphasize it, but I also want to point out that we're not saying that people who really can't advocate for themselves or people who find it, impossible to advocate for themselves, obviously they can delegate that to other people. It's when the only mechanism for redress of grievances is to go through the government that you get these negative consequences that we're talking about.
Because government is inherently biased. Okay, it's biased. It's biased towards itself. That's how it works. Because again, the only job of a politician is get elected. Get reelected to the same office, elected to the next office, get more
but
power.
Doesn't that keep them accountable? That was the whole point, right? No. You just vote them out if they're doing a bad job?
Okay. Does that, Lucy, how has that been working out?
Well, because they use their power to construct systems that protect themselves, just like you said. So even if you put the right people in charge, even if I was voted governor, I would have to play that game or I would find myself out of office again, right? I mean, think about what happened to the Libertarian Party a few years ago when we got ballot access. 2 years into our 4 years of ballot access, what happened?
Yeah,
They just
exactly.
changed the rules. Yeah.
Well, it's like, you know, it's like power corrupts, and absolute power is actually pretty nice. You know,
Yeah, and
it's
we can use it for good. I'll use the ring of power to
it's
save
yeah,
Gondor.
and this is the problem. But the problem is that from day one, people are educated to not, first of all, not deal with each other, and unfortunately, the cell phones and all of that have exacerbated that problem. But it's also the fact that we're taught that you're not supposed to deal with problems on your own. You're supposed to delegate them to somebody else who, first of all, is not involved in this. You have not directly contracted with, you've been coerced into doing it. And now you have a situation where people, instead of going to your neighbor saying, "Look, you're wrong, I disagree with you," and you come out to some kind of reasonable compromise, or at least a disagreement that you can remain neighbors, people are so disassociated from each other that they don't treat each other as human beings.
Again, because they view each other as existential threats, because this is a well-documented phenomenon that the bigger and more intrusive a state becomes, the more of a low-trust society you get.
Yes.
Everyone
It's
is afraid
amazing.
of everyone else weaponizing the state against them.
That's right.
And back to the
Well,
original subject, this is precisely what New York wants to do in the end. This is not just
Oh yeah,
we want
you have people.
transparency, because pretty much already Facebook has transparency, even if people don't read the terms of service, which they don't. But even if they don't, it is relatively transparent of what they're doing. They're a company, they want to make money, you're the product, and deal with it because you want the service. Okay, great. But when the state now wants to get into this, it causes this cascade of issues. Okay, and included in those is the company stifling speech because they're afraid of being shut down,
yeah.
fined,
Yeah.
all of these things.
Yeah. Imagine if you were in school and you and the other kids had a disagreement, but you all had agreed in advance that the big bully with the big club was going to get to decide, all uh,
Disagreements.
disagreements, right? Yeah. And he's going to come over and club on the head whoever loses. Imagine what that society would be like.
That's
Oh shit, I better get on his good side, because otherwise, what if someone else gets on his good side first?
Right.
yeah,
Especially if you can't change who gets to hold the club.
the,
Anyway,
yeah.
I think that'll do it for this episode. We've covered a lot. Unless anyone has any further thoughts.
No, that pretty much covers it for me.
All right, let me see if I can sum it up and make it make sense for our audience. So
Kathy Hochul, your idea sucks as usual. There's the summary.
I don't know that any of her ideas are even her ideas, but that's a whole other thing. So anyway, we've thoroughly, I think, walked through New York's Stop Hiding Hate Act, what it claims to do, and what we think it really does. So, as always, when we test policies like this against the core values of liberty, personal responsibility, and voluntary association, we find the state failing that test. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely.
Do
Okay.
we ever not find the state failing the test?
Well, it's more of a curve, right? So, I mean, this particular one might
We can,
not be
yeah,
as dramatic a margin as some of
not
the other
yet.
things we've
Yet.
covered.
There are way more egregious things that the state has done that we've covered on this show, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, on its face, the Stop Hiding Hate Act looks like a reasonable transparency measure. Social media companies should tell us how they moderate content, right? But underneath, it does something more insidious. It creates a direct pipeline between the government and the people who control our digital public square. It gives the state visibility into and ultimately leverage over what speech gets amplified and what speech gets buried. And here's the thing. Today, it's so-called hate speech and misinformation. Tomorrow, it's dangerous conspiracy theories. And next year, it's political dissent that threatens public safety, right? The definitions shift, the goalposts move, but the surveillance infrastructure stays in place. We've seen the pattern before. I remember our episode on 3D printed firearms, but there's also red flag laws and every other expansion of state power that starts with, we're just trying to keep you safe. So the government says this isn't censorship because they're not telling platforms what to ban or how to moderate. But when you're required to report to the Attorney General every 6 months, when noncompliance costs $15,000 per day, when the state decides whether your transparency is adequate, that's pressure, that's influence, and influence becomes control. So I think we've
Chilling
made it
effect.
clear. Yes, it's a chilling effect. It's not about protecting vulnerable communities from hate. If it were, the state would focus on actual threats and actual violence, not on monitoring
It's about
private
the
companies'
narrative
speech.
because it's always about that narrative.
Yes, this is about making sure that the narrative happens within acceptable boundaries, that the online conversation gets to be defined by whoever holds power. So, all right, that's the problem. But what can we do about it? Well, I'd say don't wait for permission to communicate freely. We
Create
live in a
platforms that are censorship proof and start using those. Start
yes,
building your network. Start getting people onto decentralized communication platforms.
you're absolutely right. And the fact is,
Buy
even
some
if
carrier pigeons. I don't know.
well, it's funny you say carrier pigeons because I was going to go in the direction of freedom tech, but old tech works too. But regardless, just looking at all the options people have, it's a golden age of ways to route around censorship, right? I mean, there's pigeons, there's platforms, there's protocols accessible right now that no state can control because no single entity owns them. There's no one to put pressure on them.
But
So, like you were saying,
also make your voice heard in the public square. Go out, and politicians that want to do these things, that want to suppress speech in any form, go against and say they're wrong. Okay? Doesn't matter their political designation or their party. The ideas are what's important. If you're suppressing speech, you are always the bad guy, even if you're a woman.
well, just remember that most speech these days happens online. So if you're going to do exactly what you just said, you first have to get on uncensorable social media. So, if you're tired of platforms that answer to both shareholders and state attorneys general, you've got to explore the alternatives. Now, I talked a lot before about Nostr, that's notes and other stuff transmitted by relays. That's a decentralized protocol where no one owns the network. You control your identity. You choose which relays to use, and no government can compel the protocol itself to report anything because there's no company to threaten. So getting started is super easy. I mean, the easiest way to do that is just download Primal, Primal. It's one of the most user-friendly Nostr clients out there. If you can use X or Twitter, you can use Primal. It's also got some video stuff on there too. So it's available on iOS, it's on Android. To set up your account, you just answer a couple questions, you generate some private keys and then a public key, and you're in. I know it sounds weird, but it's very easy. They even make following people easy, so you get like a starter set. And once
So
you're there,
start out by following the LPNY is what you're getting at.
There you go.
definitely a good
Get
idea.
5% off when you join the LPNY,
Well,
which
Nostr
is
is
free to
free,
join, by the way.
so if anyone's charging you for it, yeah. But anyway, the point is that you can follow people, you can post your thoughts, and you can know that your speech isn't subject to the whims of content moderation policies written to appease regulators or shareholders. And if Primal or any other app uses policies that you don't like, you can just take your private key, your online identity, and you can take it somewhere else. So there's no more getting canceled and losing everything you built on a particular platform. Now, other options, if you just want a simple uncensorable messaging app, would be Keet, Keet, or BitChat. And then there's also Meshtastic, which is a whole other sort of related thing. But these are peer-to-peer messaging systems that don't rely on centralized servers. So if you want private conversations that can't be monitored, logged, or subpoenaed, encrypted peer-to-peer is the way to go. So Keet and BitChat are simply apps you can install. Meshtastic is a bit more nerdy, but it's not hard to implement, and there are many good YouTube how-tos and affordable pre-made devices available on Amazon. You open the box and you can go. Now, I'm not saying these options are perfect. They're still developing. The user experience isn't always as polished as what big tech gives you. And yes, you will encounter content you don't like, because that's what free speech looks like. But if you believe that individuals, not governments, should decide what ideas are worth hearing, then these tools are how you vote with your feet. All right? Now, second, you can learn how to circumvent internet controls and digital IDs. I think we're going to have to do a whole episode on digital ID at some point. We only briefly touched on that tonight. We did talk about VPNs, and while those aren't a total solution, and some are probably honey traps,
A lot of them are, as it
I
turns
would
out.
suggest there's a good one you can look into. It's called Obscura, Obscura. Obscura. This is about as legit as the VPNs can get. You can go do your own research. Enough said about that. Third, support the Libertarian Party of New York. We're not just complaining about these laws, we're actively building out these alternatives that I was just talking about. We're creating communities of like-minded individuals, and we're helping folks organize to fight back at the local level. So if you value what we do on this show and what the LPNY does as a party, consider joining your local county affiliate. We're organizing, we're educating, and we're pushing back against every expansion of state power that we can, but we can't do it alone. We need you. So speaking of pushing back, stay tuned. We've got more episodes coming that I'm sure will examine the state using safety as a cudgel against your rights. And if you think this episode or any of the others resonate, share them. Send the episode to someone who still believes that transparency requirements are harmless, or any of the other state whatever nonsense that we've shot down in the past. Have the conversation on the subject with your friend or your family member. See if you can change their mind. And that leads me into my fourth and final thing that you can do, which is just teach others. So if anyone is willing to have their opinion changed, their next question is always some variation of, okay, but what do I do about the problem? Well, after everything we've talked about, if you, for example, understand Nostr, if you know how to use the simple user-friendly encrypted communications stuff that I mentioned before, if you figured out how to navigate VPNs and the decentralized web, go teach someone else. Host a workshop if you want to make it fancy, or write an internet guide, or make a video, or just tell your friends. The more people who understand these tools, the harder it becomes for the state to bottle up free expression and impose all their other nonsense. It helps to grow these networks so that they can become the new town square, and we won't have to play in the walled gardens of corporate big tech and mass media anymore, which allows the government to control us, whether directly or indirectly. All right. So that's pretty much it. That's really going to do it for this episode. TLDR, the Libertarian Party of New York rejects the Stop Hiding Hate Act. We don't just oppose the details, we reject the premise that the state needs to monitor how private companies manage speech in order to keep us safe. We believe that freedom of expression, even messy and uncomfortable expression, is how we stay safe, through open debate, voluntary association, and the right to speak and listen without government gatekeepers. So don't ask for permission to speak freely. Freedom of speech isn't protected by limiting social media to a padded kid-safe playground approved and managed by the nanny state. Fight back and build your own town square. Use tools the state and their cronies can't control. Connect with people who share your values. And remember, the best response to bad speech isn't government censorship, it's more speech. With that, I'm Dan Castello, and this has been the Liberty Test.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Where will you be when the order is given to censor your mind as free speech is forbidden, as martyrs for peace from the world will be driven away by the sound of a bellowing thunder and choke on the blood of a dream going under. As arrogant men tear up our Constitution, and from every direction we cry revolution, standing together and without permission, soldiers for truth. love of our country as our ammunition. Oh, but I'm only a stranger here. I'm a long, long way from my home, and I'm going to change all the things I find strange, for I am not one man alone. Yes, I'm only a stranger. I'm a long, long way from my home, and I'm going to change all the things I find strange.